to know about your stomach is two things. Number one, your stomach is responsible for moving around the food, churning it, and helping to start to break it down, right? And then number two, it releases digestive enzymes. The two major things that are going on in your stomach is it's going to start to break down fat and protein, okay? Not that it's going to digest it completely, but just that it's going to take, because they're very large molecules, so it's going to take those larger molecules and break them down into smaller pieces. Does that make sense? Now, so there are two key things here. One, in order to break down your food properly in the stomach, you have to have enough stomach acid. And why I want you to understand that is because the common misconception is that you're having issues because you have too much acid, and medically we want to treat with an antacid, which is often the exact opposite of what you need. All right, so I'm going to explain that in a little bit further detail. But so understand that. And then two, if the stomach is the spot where you're going to start to churn your food, move it around and break it down, if you have engorged yourself on a huge meal, right, there is less room for that food to move around, and so it's one of the worst things for your digestion because you're not going to start breaking it down right away. Make sense? Okay. Now, some symptoms of dysfunction in the stomach. We've got things like heartburn, right? That's obvious one. You can have pain sometimes under the left rib cage. Sometimes you can have pain back here that wraps around. Sometimes it feels like burning or tingling. You can have pain at the sternum, and be careful because these things can obviously mimic heart problems too. So don't just assume that if you know, that's also can be a very serious thing. Don't downplay it is what I'm saying. Often with a stomach issue, two big things you'll notice is bloating directly after a meal or gassy after a meal. And that can be burping gassy or coming out the other end gassy, okay? And then another thing is, which you probably would not relate to a stomach issue, but constipation, right? So when I first started out on my quest with going to classes and seminars for nutritional work, one of the first things I learned was if you have a problem lower in your digestive system, look up, and vice versa. So often, if you're not starting to digest and break down your food from the start in your stomach, you're causing issues lower down and you're causing constipation. So right off the bat, we need to make sure your stomach is doing what it needs to. Now, let's touch on heartburn for a second, because again, as I mentioned, we tend to think that we have too much acid and that's what's causing, do you guys all understand that concept? Mm-hmm. So often, if you have a heartburn issue, right, you go to a doctor, right, you're talking about acid reflux, you've got pain here, da-da-da. What's gonna happen? The doctor's likely gonna give you a Prilosec or something, prescription to cut the pain, or you might just go, you know, get something over the counter, right? And you probably feel a little better, at least pain-wise. You're not getting the pain that's the burning and whatever that you usually feel. But here's the thing. What is almost always happening if you are experiencing heartburn is that your stomach does not have enough acid to break the food down properly. And then what happens is the food sits there, it starts to rot, and guess what happens when your food rots? It ferments and releases acid. And then that acid from the rotting food is what comes up and causes the heartburn. Does that make sense? Yeah. So now here you are, you don't have enough acid, you've got this rotting food, it's causing heartburn, and what do? You go and get a Prilosec or whatever, something over the counter. Now you're decreasing your acid even more. You've just added insult to injury. You feel better, right, because that pain went away, but the food that wasn't being digested is even worse now because you've lowered even more the acid. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is not every case. Sometimes you actually do not have enough acid, right? But in most cases, in my opinion, probably 80% of cases with an issue like that, it's because there is not enough acid. And you can have too little acid. Often, the biggest thing is stress. Stress and age causes us to deplete our acid in our stomach.
My son has the problem of acid reflux.
Yeah.
I mean, from the birth, he's had this issue.
Yeah.
We've been giving whatever medicine the doctor has given. Now he doesn't need acid reflux. Like earlier what has happened is after eating, if we dry or anything, immediately he will vomit, like it comes out.
Okay.
So immediately we used to give acid reflux medicine, and then after 3 years he's able to have, now he's fine. But I see a lot of gassy or like bloating happens.
Yeah. So he might still have some underlying issues that's not as symptomatic as he's growing. His body's been able to adapt. But if you are noticed gassing and bloating and things like that, there are probably underlying issues that could create problems for him down the road. Does that make sense? So, one key thing you can do that's very simple to see if you need more acid in your stomach is when you eat with your food, take a tablespoon of like apple cider vinegar, right? Something acidic. And if that helps the issue, if that calms it down, then very likely you don't have enough acid. If you take that vinegar and you're on fire, then you probably do have too much acid. Does that make sense? That's a really general basic thing, but that's a simple thing you guys can do at home. Okay, are we good to move on?